Do you remember when movies didn't over-explain every motive, every joke, every twist? When they simply hit the gas, burned rubber, and trusted the audience to keep up? In 1977, Smokey and the Bandit roared into theaters and became something more than a comedy. It became a cultural moment, loud, fast, irreverent, and unapologetically Southern. Directed by former stuntman Hal Needham and starring Burt Reynolds, Sally Field, Jerry Reed, and Jackie Gleason, the film told a story so simple it felt almost rebellious. Haul illegal beer across state lines, outrun the law, and look good doing it. That's it. No interwoven timelines. No moral lectures. No backstory monologues explaining childhood trauma. Just a black Trans Am, a truck full of Coors, and 28 hours to make history. Simple premise. Minimal plot. Maximum attitude. And yet it became the second highest grossing film of 1977, trailing only Star Wars. How did a movie that began as scribbles on yellow legal pads end up racing past nearly every major studio production of its year? How did chaos, improvisation, and friendship create lightning in a bottle? Let's roll the windows down and take a closer look. A terrible script that changed everything. When Burt Reynolds first read the script, he reportedly said it was the worst he had ever seen. Not because it was offensive. Not because it lacked potential. Because it barely existed. Hal Needham hadn't typed a polished screenplay. He hadn't formatted scenes properly. He'd scrawled ideas across legal pads, car chases, punchlines, loose character beats. It was less a script and more a roadmap sketched at a gas station diner. There were holes everywhere. Dialogue wasn't finished. Scenes didn't always connect cleanly. So why say yes? Because loyalty matters. Needham had been Reynolds' stunt double for years. When Reynolds leaped from buildings or survived violent crashes on screen, it was often Needham taking the real hit. He'd broken bones so Reynolds could look invincible. Reynolds knew that. And sometimes decisions aren't about perfection. They're about character. He had a gap in his schedule. He liked the spirit of it. More importantly, he trusted his friend. That trust became the film's secret engine. Without a rigid script locking everyone in place, the production became fluid. Dialogue could breathe. Scenes could evolve. The cast could respond to one another instead of reciting. Have you noticed how rare that feels today? When was the last time a major studio film felt loose enough to surprise even itself? Chaos as a creative strategy. Sally Field would later say there was barely a usable script when filming began. Sometimes they didn't know exactly what the next scene would look like until cameras were rolling. If something felt funny, they kept it. If a line landed flat, they tossed it. There was no overthinking. Needham shot fast, sometimes recklessly fast. The budget was modest, the schedule tight. They didn't have time to polish endlessly. But that urgency created electricity. The rhythm of conversations felt conversational. The flirtation between Bandit and Carrie sounded spontaneous. Snowman's banter felt lived in. Instead of feeling like characters written for punchlines, they felt like people caught mid-adventure. That looseness became authenticity. Modern filmmaking often prioritizes control, storyboards, pre-visualization, committee rewrites. But Smokey and the Bandit thrived on instinct. Isn't it fascinating how sometimes structure suffocates creativity? Jackie Gleason, the human tornado. If improvisation fueled the engine, Jackie Gleason was the nitrous boost. As Sheriff Buford T. Justice, Gleason was unleashed. It's estimated that 80 to 90% of his dialogue was improvised. Many of his legendary insults weren't written, they exploded in real time. "You scumbum! You some bitch! Daddy, I'm gonna barbecue your ass in molasses." None of that existed on paper. Gleason insisted his character needed someone to yell at constantly. So the filmmakers created Junior, a character who didn't even exist in the early outline, just so Buford could berate him for 90 minutes straight. That dynamic became comedic gold. But here's the deeper layer. The name Buford T. Justice belonged to a real Florida highway patrolman who knew Reynolds' father, a longtime police chief. Reynolds grew up listening to Southern lawmen talk, colorful, sharp-tongued, theatrical. Buford wasn't invented from thin air. He was memory exaggerated. Isn't that how the most enduring characters are often born? Not from imagination alone, but from recognition? A casting gamble that paid off. Studio executives initially thought Sally Field wasn't sexy enough to play Carrie. At the time, she was associated with wholesome television roles. She was Gidget. She was the girl next door. But Reynolds saw something more. He had watched her dramatic work and recognized depth, vulnerability mixed with steel. He insisted she was right. Field herself wanted the role desperately. She needed to break out of the nice girl box. And when she appears in Smokey and the Bandit, barefoot bride in a runaway wedding dress, she's not just charming. She's sharp, playful, confident. She keeps up with Bandit. She challenges him. She laughs at him. That balance made the chemistry electric. It's remarkable how often studios misjudge what audiences want. Perhaps viewers recognize authenticity faster than executives do. When fiction meets reality. During filming, Burt Reynolds and Sally Field fell in love. Not as a publicity stunt. Not as manufactured marketing. It happened between takes. On long drives between locations. During laughter-filled rehearsals. Their spark on screen wasn't acting. It was real. They dated for nearly 5 years. Reynolds would later call Field the love of his life and express regret that they didn't remain together. In a film driven by horsepower and bravado, their genuine affection gave it heart. Have you ever watched a movie and sensed something beneath the performance? That invisible layer that makes it feel alive? Audiences can tell. The song written in hours. The theme song, Eastbound and Down, was written by Jerry Reed in just a few hours. Needham asked for something that explained the plot. Reed delivered a track that did exactly that. Eastbound and down, loaded up and truckin'. We gonna do what they say can't be done. In under 3 minutes, the entire story was distilled into rhythm. The song didn't just accompany the movie, it amplified it. It became inseparable from its identity. How often does a theme song become shorthand for freedom itself? The beer was real. The cargo at the center of the story wasn't random. In 1977, Coors beer wasn't widely distributed east of the Mississippi. It wasn't pasteurized, meaning long-distance shipping was complicated. Licensing restrictions added to the mystique. Transporting it in bulk across state lines could violate alcohol laws. People genuinely made Coors runs. Scarcity created mythology. And the movie tapped directly into that real-world curiosity. It wasn't just about beer. It was about crossing lines, beating arbitrary rules, outrunning authority. At its core, Smokey and the Bandit was a fantasy about freedom on American highways. Isn't that a theme that never truly goes out of style? The car that became an icon. The 1977 Pontiac Trans Am wasn't just a vehicle. It was a co-star. With its black paint, gold trim, and screaming chicken hood decal, it symbolized swagger. Pontiac reportedly saw sales skyrocket after the film's release. Dealerships couldn't keep black and gold models in stock. The car wasn't quiet. It wasn't subtle. It announced itself. In a decade wrestling with economic uncertainty and post-Vietnam cynicism, the bold machine offered something visceral: motion. Forward momentum. What does a car represent when it becomes larger than the film itself? Identity. Aspiration. Escape. A runaway hit. When Smokey and the Bandit hit theaters, expectations were modest. It wasn't built as prestige cinema. It wasn't awards bait. But audiences returned again and again. They brought friends. They quoted lines. They honked horns in parking lots. It grossed over $300 million worldwide on a relatively small budget, an astonishing return. And here's the fascinating contrast. Star Wars offered space fantasy and mythic heroism. Smokey offered asphalt rebellion and good old-fashioned mischief. Both tapped into something audiences were craving in the late 1970s: escape. One looked to the stars. The other looked to the open highway. Which kind of escape resonates more with you? Why it still works. Nearly 50 years later, Smokey and the Bandit still holds energy modern films struggle to replicate. It doesn't apologize for being fun. It doesn't explain every joke. It doesn't overcomplicate. Its charm lies in its looseness, in its trust, in its refusal to overthink. Could a film like that be made the same way today? Or has the industry become too calculated, too algorithm-driven? Maybe that's why it endures. Because it feels human, imperfect, fast, alive. And perhaps that's the ultimate lesson behind its success. Sometimes greatness isn't engineered. Sometimes it's improvised at 110 miles per hour, windows down, song blasting, sheriff in pursuit. Picture the night sky above a flat, lonely highway, light spilling from a diner like a stage. The Bandit drives. The radio crackles. The silhouette of the Trans Am glints in a puddle of sodium light and gasoline. It looks effortless. It looks inevitable. But the truth is messier, louder, and far more human. What happens when a handful of stubborn people decide to trust instinct over 100 memos? How far will they go to keep the engine roaring? Sometimes the best answers to those questions are messy. A director who laughs when the camera nearly tips, a lead who improvises a line that suddenly feels like scripture, a crew that sacrifices sleep and safety for the shot that will make strangers laugh. Charisma is contagious, and it turned a loose collection of stunts, jokes, and country songs into cultural folklore with better cars. The car that became an icon. Before the film, the 1977 Pontiac Trans Am was just another performance car on dealer lots. Fast, flashy, but replaceable. After the film, it was a legend. Sales didn't just tick up, they soared. The black and gold special edition stopped being a trim package and started being an identity badge. People who had never cared about torque or carburetors suddenly cared about how their mirrors caught the light at dusk. Teens sketched the bird on hood decals between algebra problems. Mechanics who'd worked on sedans their whole lives found themselves explaining horsepower to women who wanted to buy the look, not the specs. Pontiac executives were so thrilled they reportedly promised Reynolds a new Trans Am every year. That promise sounds like a joke until you imagine accepting a gift from a company that suddenly sees you as its spirit animal. For Reynolds, the car was more than a prop. It became shorthand for charm, swagger, and a kind of small-town Americana on steroids. It said, "I live fast. I smile faster." When was the last time a movie car reshaped the market like that? Can a prop be more persuasive than an advertising campaign? The CB radio craze. If the Trans Am changed what people bought, the film changed how they spoke. CB radios, the kind long-haul truckers used to trade locations and warnings, were suddenly accessories you found in station wagon dashboards. Handles proliferated: Bandit, Snowman, Rubber Duck. The airwaves filled with a new code of slang. "What's your 20?" stopped being trucker jargon and became a suburban question on the way to the grocery store. The cultural ripple wasn't just linguistic. It was social. Neighbors waved at one another with invisible codes, and long car trips felt like secret club meetings. For a while, America bonded over dashboard chatter. Bars played CB-themed tunes. Road trip playlists included novelty songs about convoys. Even the way people tuned into radio dramas changed. There was a hunger for simple, kinetic connection against the backdrop of disco beats and economic turbulence. Could any modern film today shape everyday language the same way? Would a viral TikTok sound or a streaming hit carry the same communal weight? The bridge jump that almost failed. Everyone remembers the bridge jump as if it were a neat, heroic exclamation point in the film. But it was no tidy punctuation, it was a gamble cast in concrete. The crew treated the setup like a high-stakes card game. The gap was wider than it looked on paper. The Trans Am was heavy. Aerodynamics, mass, and gravity weren't negotiable. The shot relied on brute force, precise speed, and a certain faith that the car would obey physics long enough to sail and crash in equal measure. When the moment came, the stunt was everything and nothing like practice. They added a rocket-like boost, not because they wanted to cheat, but because they had to. The landing demolished the transmission and bent the chassis out of shape. The car never drove again. They patched the story with the language of legend. "We risked it. It was worth it." The image embedded itself in people's minds. Bandit mid-air, motion frozen like a myth. That single second captured the movie's ethos. Commit fully, accept the fallout, and let the audience catch up later. Isn't there something honest about that? When was the last time you saw art that didn't apologize for its risk? Real cops, real trouble. The film's chases were meant to be cinematic, weaving, staged, choreographed, but the line between fiction and reality blurred often. Local law enforcement, watching from patrol cars, sometimes missed the memo. Officers pulled into scenes, sirens wailing, their presence captured on film as if the universe were improvising a cameo. Residents called in reports of reckless drivers. Neighbors saw cars barreling through town and dialed 911. Fresh footage was occasionally ruined because a real patrol car drove through a coordinated stunt. On set, those interruptions weren't just frustrating, they were dangerous and expensive. Imagine composing a perfect chase only to have an actual cruiser enter frame like a drumbeat gone wrong. And yet, there was also a strange synergy. The movie about outrunning the law almost drew the law into its narrative. Did reality make the fiction better? Or did the fiction foolishly flirt with catastrophe? When your art leans into chaos, how much chaos is too much? A near tragedy. Not every tale from the set is a gallows laugh anecdote. One stunt veered frighteningly close to a real tragedy. A car lost control near a little league field where child extras had been placed to watch. The car clipped turf and skidded toward the stands. For a breathless moment, everything froze. Nobody was hurt, but the memory didn't leave anyone who saw it. The director, the stunt drivers, and Reynolds all carried that day with them, a silent reminder of the razor-thin margin between spectacle and harm. Behind the comedic bravado and the elbow-jabbing camaraderie was a ledger of risk, a tally of moments when luck or quick reflexes were the final safety net. How comfortable are we as audiences with the danger underpinning our entertainment? Does knowing the stakes make a film more thrilling or more troubling? The salary that shifted the budget. By the time production rolled, Reynolds was a box office magnate. He commanded a salary that, on paper, dwarfed much of the rest of the cast. That $1 million contract was a weight the production felt 2 days before cameras started rolling, when the studio cut $1 million from the overall budget. They had the same vision but fewer dollars. The crew tightened, not just financially but creatively. What the budget took away, improvisation returned. Boxes of equipment were left unused, scenes were trimmed, jokes were invented on the fly. There is an alchemy to constraint. When the map is smaller, you search more closely for the treasure. And sometimes those corners cut in budget are the very edges that make a film breathe. Would the movie have felt the same if every line had been polished until it lost its grit? Does perfection ever get in the way of personality? The unsung team. Beyond the glamorous center, the car, the star, the jump, there was a swarm of people who made the film possible. Grips who rigged lights with tape and prayer, cameramen who braced themselves in the cold to track a passing hood, mechanics who repaired vehicles at midnight under shop lights, and fizzing production assistants who ran on coffee and the idea that they were building something memorable. They quarreled. They celebrated. They ate greasy diner food as if it were a sacrament. They became a kind of family forged in exhaust fumes and deadline panic. The movie's voice has their fingerprints all over it, and yet the public narrative often reduces them to footnotes. How often do we remember the hands that build our cultural myths? Why it still matters. On paper, the movie shouldn't have worked. Loose script. Budget cuts. Improvised dialogue. Risky stunts. Yet it became a cultural touchstone. Why? Because it caught a mood, the sense that freedom and rebellion could be funny, affectionate, and human. It trusted its viewers not to overanalyze every beat but to lean into the ride. The film's charm wasn't a manufactured, committee-approved brand. It was spontaneous, messy, and alive. In an era where movies often feel engineered for demographic slices and algorithmic success, this one felt driven by instinct. It reminds us that audiences sometimes want to be invited to the party rather than sold the party. Could a movie like that be made today? Would studios allow the kind of improvisation that risks financial losses and PR headaches? Would audiences still rush to a theater for a story that feels made in the moment and not in a market analysis? Which behind-the-scenes story surprised you the most? Was it the financial scramble, the near miss with the Little League field, the improvisational script, or the way a car shifted from product to personality? Maybe the truest lesson is that art sometimes thrives where plans falter. Sometimes the best narratives aren't polished blueprints but frenzied scribbles on the margins, a slapdash idea scribbled on a yellow pad in the back of a truck, conversations at 2 a.m. over coffee, the kind of lines that become quotable because they were honest the first time someone said them. So I ask again, could a movie like this be made the same way today? Would Hollywood floor it and trust us to hang on? Or was the film simply the product of a moment in time, when cultural appetite, a charismatic lead, and an exhausted, scrappy crew collided in a way no one could predict? There's a kind of romance in that uncertainty. Maybe that's why, decades later, we still rewind to that one airborne frame, still find ourselves humming a chorus of trucker country, and still glance a little longer at a black and gold Trans AM when one rolls by. The car, the radio, the risk, their relics and road signs, all at once. And finally, when you think of the movies that have stuck with you, are you honoring the polished masterpieces or the reckless, human experiments that dared to be less than perfect? Which do you prefer, the safely constructed epic or the improvisational joyride that could have crashed at any second?